Ukraine says that Russia has launched missile and drone strikes in the east following the expiry of a 30-hour Easter ceasefire. Now, both sides have accused each other of breaching the truce. Russian President Vladimir Putin says that Moscow will now assess the truce before considering further moves. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy has called the ceasefire empty and a PR exercise. He's pushing for a 30-day pause in strikes on civilian targets. Talks aimed at reaching a longer ceasefire are due to be held in London this week. All right, I want to bring in now military analyst Marina Miron from the Defense Studies Department at King's College London for more on this story. Marina, good to see you. Let's start with this 30-hour Easter ceasefire that was declared by Russia. Ukraine reported nearly 3,000 violations, some of them including deadly attacks. So was this even a serious ceasefire to begin with?
Good evening, Brent. Well, here is a problem. Both sides will accuse each other of violating the ceasefire, but there is no neutral party on the ground to actually assess any of the claims. And the truce will be somewhere in the middle. The problem is also that the ceasefire was communicated very late by President Putin. So the other side had, one could argue, not enough time to consider implementing it or to consider the ups and downs. For the Russians, it was important to showcase, obviously, as we see that Ukraine cannot keep to the ceasefire. The Ukrainian side is arguing the Russians cannot keep to their own ceasefire. Mm-hmm. So we shouldn't really consider the ceasefire to be valid because in essence, in order to have some sort of a ceasefire, there has to be some sort of a political agreement and monitoring mechanism which can enforce such a ceasefire. In such a case, it's very, very difficult. And so I'm afraid that the truce is buried somewhere deep underneath and there is no way to assess it, but it's more of a political move.
Ukraine's President Zelenskyy, he is calling for a peace in the sky, saying that is the first step towards a real peace. Do we know what is that, and how would that help Ukraine?
Well, essentially what President Zelenskyy is calling for is the a halting of strikes on key infrastructure by the Russian side. Now, for Ukraine, it would be very important if the Russians could hold those strikes because the Russians, and we know, have been sending salvos of missiles and drones, what they say to be military targets, the Ukrainians say otherwise, but either way, it would certainly benefit Ukraine. Now, the problem is Russia going to agree? Because it seems to be a little bit one-sided, given the fact that the Ukrainians don't have the same capabilities. They don't have any long-range capabilities to strike targets inside Russia, save for the drones, which cannot do enough damage. And again, we have the same problem. Firstly, you need to reach an agreement. Secondly, you need somebody to monitor this ceasefire. And thirdly, you need somebody credible enough to be able to enforce punishment upon the side which violates the ceasefire. And as the history of warfare shows, it has been difficult in every single war to have those neutral parties monitoring and enforcing ceasefires, as we have seen in Lebanon, for instance.
U.S. President Trump once famously said that if he were in the White House, he would be able to end this war within 24 hours. That is not the case. We're approaching 100 days of this Trump administration, and now we're looking at possible talks taking place in London this week. Trump says he's hopeful that a deal will be reached there. Is that a realistic hope?
Well, one can hope. And I mean, Trump is a politician. He cannot go into that meeting saying, I hope to achieve nothing at all. That would be counterproductive, I think, also from the PR standpoint. But we also know that there have been statements made that if a deal is not reached soon, that the U.S. would exit the negotiations and leave both parties to handle it out on the battlefield. And so I think attempts can be made, but certainly it's very difficult to bridge the different positions that both Russia and Ukraine hold in terms of how this war is to end, where the line of contact will be, and who keeps the Russian-controlled territories and so on. So I think there is still a very long road ahead, and I don't think that this meeting will be key to deciding what is going to happen next.
Okay. Military analyst Marina Miron. As always, Marina, we appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you.
Now, in his final Easter message yesterday, Pope Francis called for peace in Ukraine. And today, the presidents of Ukraine and Russia have both expressed their condolences following the Pope's death. Volodymyr Zelenskyy said Pope Francis prayed for peace in Ukraine and for Ukrainians. We grieve together with Catholics and all Christians who look to Pope Francis for spiritual support. Meanwhile, Russia's President Vladimir Putin has said Francis actively promoted the development of dialogue between the Russian Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches, as well as constructive cooperation between Russia and the Holy See. Now let's bring in DW's Russia analyst Konstantin Eggert, who's observed the Vatican and the papacy of Francis for many, many years. Now, what was Francis' position when it comes to the war in Ukraine?
Well, look, Eggert, he wanted peace. He was a sincere man of peace, definitely. So he wanted this war to stop. But I think that if you look at the way it was seen, especially in Kiev, he didn't formulate correctly enough or clearly enough the reasons for this conflict for himself, as well as the conditions on which he would like this conflict to end. So that's why I think beyond generalities, alas, there was not much in the Pope's and the Vatican's position.
Now, tell us about the relationship between the Catholic Church and the Russian Orthodox Church. How has that developed under Francis?
Well, it's very interesting because Pope Francis became the first pope to meet the Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. And this was the dream of the late Saint John Paul II and Benedict XVI, but it only came to fruition in 2016 in February when Francis was Pope. They met in Cuba, and that was the meeting which was well, I would say mostly about also pronouncing generalities, because by that time there was already the annexation of Crimea, relations between Moscow and the West were tense. So basically it was a meeting for history, just for photographers, but not much was decided. It's interesting that I've spoken to people that were at the meeting, people from the entourage of the Pope that accompanied him to this meeting in Havana. And my understanding, and I think I can reveal it now, my understanding was that the Pope came out of the meeting not very much impressed by Patriarch Kirill as a spiritual leader, and he even is allegedly said, well, that's not so much of a patriarch, than he's more of a politician. And in the eyes of the Pope, that was probably not a compliment.
Now, Pope Francis clearly and believably a man of peace. Did he suffer that he couldn't do more to promote peace between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, I think he did, because he was indeed a man of peace. But, you know, Gerhard, to put it short, in a short sort of one sentence, no one can achieve peace in Ukraine. No one can mediate peace in Ukraine unless Vladimir Putin ceases to want to continue the war. So I think that a lot here was unachievable from the beginning, because we see even now, fourth year, the Kremlin wants to continue its assault on Ukraine. But also I think there were specifics here. I think this Pope, as opposed to the previous ones, had little exposure to international diplomacy beyond his native South America. He was not very much immersed in the intricacies of the 20th century history of Europe, and especially the post-communist history of Europe. So to some extent, he approached this war as he would approach, well, any war anywhere in the world. And this was, I think, one of the reasons why his diplomats could not formulate a really tough and clear approach to mediation in this particular case.
VW's Russia analyst Konstantin Eggert there. Thank you.